Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending October's CAD training. This month's topic will be Assemblies and Corridors in Civil 3D. We are starting with last month's project and continuing on from our profiles and alignments. So you can go back and check those out if you wish. All right, so there's two real key things here going on. The most important one is definitely the corridor. But in order to have a corridor, you need to have so many more components already created to get there. So the first component is an assembly. The assembly is a collection of sub-assemblies um, that can be applied to a corridor. Got some words in there kind of describing what an assembly is used for. In our case, we typically use those as a cross section for a roadway. So we'll have the lanes described, the sidewalks, the curbing, how it gets graded off, very basic information that we can then put onto our corridor or added to our corridor so that we can start doing our grading and on larger roadway projects, mainly subdivisions. So that takes me to a corridor. The corridor is what we're trying to. The end of the day, that's what we're looking for. The corridor is flexible. It can be changed fairly quickly. It does have a lot of settings, so you have to become familiar with the interface. There's not always intuitive, um, but from that standard subassembly added to the corridor, which is made up of the alignment and the proposed profile, you can get a good idea of how your grading will look on your roadway or whatever else or linear entity that you have, how it looks in the site. You can push, you can pull, you change the profile, it changes the alignment, or not, it changes the elevation of the corridor reacts, can be rebuilt, and we'll show you the updated surfaces. So like I said, you need to have a surface, an alignment, a profile, and assemblies before you can even create a corridor. And then as far as settings, there's a ton of them. Luckily, we've gone through and we have basic settings for your corridor already kind of configured in our template. So if you have a template, you're a lot better off. A copy of the presentation will be on the S drive along with the CAD files that you can use to test these things out. The CAD file is read-only, so if you do open it and you want to save it for later, you'll need to save it with your name or anything like that. You can do that so you can keep working on it to test things out. And of course, Autodesk has tutorials online for these, so there is links that you can follow to do corridors and for assemblies. All right, let's get onto the screen. Okay, so like I said, we're going to start out with last month's training example. We created an alignment and a profile, and we have even a proposed profile showing the slopes, the vertical curves, um, going the whole way through. Now, this is a really long profile. Um, in order to put it onto sheets, you would probably create one large one like this for your design, and then you would create smaller ones that would fit onto a 50 scale sheet for plotting. All right. So like I said, we have a proposed centerline elevation on your profile. The white is the existing grade, the red is existing grade to the right, and the magenta is existing grade to the left. Now those offsets are set at 25. That is the width of our corridor in this of this right of way. Sometimes we would extend that out to the building setback line. Again, refer to last month's training if you need a refresher on how to set those up. So the first thing we're going to go over is assemblies. Now in our template, we have this box with some pre-populated assemblies, but if you need to create one, it's a good idea that you know how to do that. So the first thing that you would need to do is go up here to your toolbar and you need to turn on your tool palettes. So click on that, and that brings up a tool palette of civil imperial subassemblies. For the most part, I use the basic. There is one item that we can use that's not in the basic tab, but they have so many, it's almost too many um, pre-populated sub-assemblies. And right now, in our use, we always are fairly generic. We're trying, we're not getting into the really detailed um, of some of these sub-assemblies. So like I said, I usually stick with the basic that will get you going and point you in the right direction. So once we have our palette up, we can go up here to Assembly and create Assembly. You want to give it a good descriptive name because you will have to pick this from a list later on when you're adding it to your corridor. So I'm going to call this 24-foot cartway with 5-foot sidewalks on both sides. That might be a little bit long. You can always shorten that up and put a good description. So down here, your first option you have to choose from is assembly type. We have several different options. In this case, I'm going to make it undivided crowned road, but in the future, you may need to do a super elevated or planar road or a divided crowned road. So you have those other options in here. So in my past experience, the undivided crowned road has been the predominant solution or assembly type. We'll leave both of these other two options as our standard, and assembly layer is set for 0. We can leave it at that. You don't actually see that. It's off to the side of your normal plan. So that being on 0 is fine. I hit OK. It's going to ask, where do you want to put your baseline for your assembly? Just click anywhere, and now you get a green line. Well done. You now have an assembly. Doesn't look like much, but that's the basic, that's the midpoint of your assembly. So now we can start adding sub-assemblies to that assembly. And the first one we go to is basic lane. You click on basic lane, and then it's going to say, hey, what assembly are you adding this to? And you can click the green bar, and now I have a representation of a basic lane. Once we go through, I typically try to set up all of my assemblies first before I customize and change the settings to be specific to my project. So the next thing that I would look at, I got a basic lane, we're going to do a curb, basic curb. Now here's where it gets a little bit more important to make sure you zoom in, and you can see each one of these little purple dots are connection points for your next sub-assembly. So you want to make sure that you are clicking on the correct connection point. In this case, our curb should be connected to the top. It draws a curb. Yes, it's straight face, but we can change the settings a little bit to reflect our typical extruded concrete curb. Okay, so we got one curb in. Now we need to put, typically after that, we usually have a lawn area. So in this case, I'm actually going to go down to, let me see, I believe it's, nope, I just had it, generic. And it's going to be link to marked point. Oh, I'm sorry, no, it's not. Yeah, it is. No. Here we go. Link width and slope. Okay, so again, you have to select on that connection point, and see, in this case, it just puts a little line in there. Okay, now we go back up to basic, and we need to get a sidewalk in there. Here's your basic sidewalk. So I'm not really worried about what the settings are, the widths, thicknesses, anything like that. I'm not doing any worry about that. And then the last thing, which is always one of the most important ones, but has the very strange name, is the basic side slope cut ditch. This one This sub-assembly actually allows you then to tie off to the surface at a predetermined slope. And you can have those slopes change depending on if it's a cut or a fill. There's a lot of settings on this one, but we usually dumb it down to very minimal. And again, we want to tie off to the top. Okay, so there we go. We have our basic sub-assemblies added to our assembly on one side of it. Now I usually go through, once I have the basic setup of it, the layout, you can grab or select each component. So first one's basic lane, and if you go to properties, you can see all the settings that are available for it. So it tells you that this is the right side of the road, which it is. The width is 12, which is good. We're going to do a 24-foot cartway, so half of that. The depth is 8 inches. Now, if you get really particular, you can actually go in here in future. We could actually have it separate different base course, wearing course, all those as separate entities. And then when we do overall quantities, they could be taken back out. We have not become that advanced in the process, but that is a possibility in the future. And then the slope. This is set to default 2. I'm going to bump it up to 3 just to make sure. I know I have some flatter areas of roadway in this design, so I want to make sure that the water gets off the road into the curbs, so I make it a little steeper. Okay, so that's the curb, or that's the basic lane. And I basically go right through here and change settings on each one of these components to make it to be how I like it. Again, you go to properties. Now on this one, you can see it's a right. The attachment point's the front. The width, if it's extruded, it's be 0.875. The depth we can leave that way. That is the depth goes from this point at the bottom the whole way up to here. Now, if this was a straight face curb, that might be fine. That means that there's a foot underground, and that's what the depth below shows. So if you subtract the depth below from the overall depth, that shows that it's a 6-inch curb. We could change things, I guess. You could say this is 0 and that this is 0.5, and that could be accurate, but it really doesn't need to be changed. But there is that option. So if we really want to get really particular in the future, we could create our lanes with the curb actually setting on top of it and go through that. For the most part, we haven't gotten that detailed. There is no real good reason to do that at this point, but it is possible. So if you have someplace that can do that, or that you need to do that, it's definitely something that detail wise we can really get into the nitty gritty of all the details and depths and widths and make it completely accurate for takeoff quantity purposes. All right, so that's the 6-inch curb with the proper width. This is just our link. That's now, if this is a 50-foot cartway and we want the curbs on the inside, so essentially we'd have to subtract 12 foot minus 5 foot minus the 0.875, all from the 25 foot, and that leaves us with a width of 7.125. I know it's not the most common width, but that gets us to the final product. And we want our 2% slope going up away from the crown. So that gives us our lawn area that we typically have. So that might have your street trees or utilities are underneath there. And that last component, well, no, not the last component, second to last sub-assembly, we have our sidewalk. And again, just going to go through, it's on the right side. We're going to make this a 5-foot sidewalk. That's going to have that depth, so that's a 4-inch depth sidewalk. That's pretty good. Now notice here though, I don't see a slope. So I'm not quite sure why there isn't a slope associated with your sidewalk. It almost looks like it is flat, which I believe it is. So this may not be the best sub-assembly to use in this case. For this example, we'll leave it at that. We could also replace this with a lane and then size it properly. And go through there. the last subassembly, this one has the most settings, tons of them. So typically what we need to do is go down through here. It's set for cut slopes 2:1 and fill slopes to 4:1. I typically go in here and I'll just say change everything to 3. You can just type in 3 and go down through there. If there's a width, I usually put that to 0 because we're not looking to put any kind of roadside swales in here. So as long as you get down to this point right here, you don't really need to worry about the rest of this. Okay. I'm going to escape out. So now we have half of our assembly. If it's going to be mirrored, all you need to do is select those sub-assemblies and make sure you use the proper sub-assembly commands. They are highlighted up here when you're selecting. If you use the standard move or mirror commands, it gets really strange. Like the move command, if you move it with the regular move, it will actually move each component that same distance. So they just keep spreading out farther and farther and farther. But in this case, we want to do the mirror. So it's going to say, okay, where's the base point that you want to mirror this side? Select the green line and you're done. Escape. Now this side has the exact same settings as this side. So that would be our typical type of road cross section. Like I said, you can go in here, you can modify these components and sub-assemblies, and it will live change your corridor as it goes. And again, you don't have to recreate this every single time. Our template already has this exact subassembly right here. Now, if I look at this sidewalk, let's see, this one is 5 foot. Now, this one used a basic lane component, so that would have a slope of 2% with a depth of 4 inches and a 5 foot wide. So there is a difference. This part here, you can see that there's extra lines in here just signifying the different types or different parts of the actual stone, wearing course, base course, all that stuff is in there. On the properties, it has more settings. You could actually go through and change all those depths. This is our typical. It's easy to go to. You can see there's your 12. So here, this one has a 2.5% slope. So I want to change that to be, we're going to go, let me see, -3, -3. And these base ones already have been changed. So now we have in our template, that's already there. So I can understand if somebody forgets how to do sub-assemblies, because a lot of times we just use the default ones we already had created, but it is important to have a background knowledge of how it's done so that if there is that weird, strange little thing that you have to create, you can do it. Now, if you need to make a copy or make a change, you would want to select the green baseline and say copy. Actually, you don't even have to do that. I'll take that back. You can just use the regular copy command if it's the full entire thing that you're looking to copy. So we can do that. Now, if I select that baseline, that copied baseline, and go to properties, you'll see that it shows the name of the, oh, where'd it go? Oh, I'm sorry, up here. It shows the name 24-foot cartway, sideway, both 3. So it's already been copied multiple times. So that's why the importance of giving a good generic or good descriptive name and description to your profiles or your sub-assemblies and assemblies are important. So this must be, so it makes it much easier when you can see what one you're adding, and I'll show you why. Okay, so now we have our sub-assembly created. We're basically ready to start building our corridor. I'm going to close our palette. We're going to go up to the ribbon and select corridor and corridor. Now, this window may look different to some of you who have not moved up to the 2024 or 2025 versions of Civil 3D. It's a little different. Same information, just presented in a slightly different way. So here, the first thing you need to do is give your corridor a name. So we're going to call this Main Street. You can give it a description. Um, in this case, we're just going to leave that go. Leave standard and standard as your settings here for your corridor style and your code set. Those have already been set up in the template for our most common applications. It's going to put this on the PR corridor layer. So that's already set up. So really now we have to go through and assign an alignment, a profile, and an assembly to this corridor. So right now we can hit on that, hit on an alignment. It has a drop down and it will list all the alignments that we have in this project. Currently we only have one. Or we could, if there is multiple and we don't know the name of it, we can do the selection box and go out and pick it from the CAD file. So there we go. It even says what profile do you want to use. We want to use the proposed one. All right, so that actually set two of the answers to the required items. I can go to assembly and you can see it will list every single assembly that we have created in this drawing. Our one that we just created earlier was this one. So we'll select that. Now, the last thing that we need to do, let me see here, make sure I got this set. Okay. Excuse me. Is to set our target surface. This is grayed out until you actually set up these three items. So our target surface in this case is our existing surface. And this is another opportunity to say in the template, the existing and proposed already already created. So if you use the different techniques to create that existing surface, it's easy just to point right to there. All right, so those are the main settings that we need to have for a corridor. I'm going to hit OK, and we get a new window. So there's an error somewhere around here. That's okay. Typically oh no, that just means it has not been built. So here's all the information. I want to show you a couple different things here on this window. You can edit your start station and your end station. So if you're, let's say, here we go. We have this project is divided up into multiple phases in the future. So we only need part of the road. We could actually say, okay, our corridor is going to run from start station 0 up to start station or station 1300, let's say. We could change those settings right here, and then our corridor will only go to this point and then end. And you can even add multiple corridors or assemblies to each area. So if there's an intersection, if there's a change in, there's a parking lot to the side or parallel parking on the side or a mailbox pull off, you can actually set those regions up and have that all associated with different assemblies. Much more complicated situation. We're not going to get into that, but today, define details, but that is a possibility. Typically what I usually do though, before I build my surface, I check my frequency. We already have this set in the template, so along the tangent, so any of the straight sections, it's going to sample every 10 feet. And on curves, every 1 foot. I found that the smaller this increment is, the better contour signatures we have going around curves. It sticks much closer to the curb. It demonstrates a little bit better. You get less jaggedness in your contour lines. So we keep that like that. And then again, along vertical curves, it samples every 5 feet. It's possible that we could change that to 1 foot. We'll leave it at 5 foot. So this is still a pretty good gauge of how your contours will show up. The target is the other thing that is often needs to be looked at if you have multiple surfaces that you need corridor to tie off to, you can change that in here. It will show you all the different surfaces that are available to be targets. We already have our targets set to existing. The other option is, if you want, you can change all of them to existing in one shot. Again, we don't need to do that. It's already set up when we first went through. Actually, it might not have been. We'll just change that real quick. So I just selected set all, and we'll do that. When I hit OK, it's going to pop up your window. Do you want to rebuild the corridor? This is the first time we've built it, so yes. Rebuild that corridor. It's going to take a couple minutes, maybe not a minute, a couple seconds, and it should pop up here with our corridor. So our style that we have configured for our corridor, our standard style, looks like this. It's a component of showing you, the blue lines show you every point that it's taking a sample. So remember, if in the alignment, it was every 10 feet. On curves, it was every 1 foot. So that's why these are so much tighter, because it was on a horizontal curve. And also, actually, these might be 5 because I know this is a vertical curve. This might be 10 because it's not on a vertical curve. Same with these. So it will go through, figures all that out so that it can sample and give you a much better looking surface. So it went the whole way around. You can see this outside line is where it believes the daylight for your proposed grading will be. So it looks like, real quick, we stayed on our property in this area. Looks like we have some fill in this area, which makes sense since this is a drainage way going through. But I don't see any surfaces. I don't see any contours. So once we look at the corridor in the basic style, we say, okay, that looks decent. Let's see what the contours look like. You select on one of those blue lines. You can right click and go to corridor properties. And you can see across the top here, you have your parameters. It's very similar to what we looked at before when we were first creating it. It gives you a little bit more options. You can add additional parameters, different sections of the roadway, start end sections. You have your codes. Typically, I don't mess with these. These are standard codes. Get your feature lines. This shows you all the feature lines that can be created if you need them. And then surfaces. This is where I wanted to get to. Right now, this window is blank. In order to create a surface for your corridor, you first click on that little icon there. It creates this surface right here. Now, if that's all you did, it wouldn't show anything because you haven't added the information, the data, the definition of the surface. So typically it is based off the links. In this case, we're going to be using the top because we want our contours to be shown at the top of our corridor. I'm going to hit the plus sign, and that adds the top as part of our surface. Now, in order to change the style of our surface so we can see contours, we go into here and we can change that to be our proposed contours 1s and 5s. And hit OK. It will go through, it will add the contours, and you can see it fills in the blanks in between. Not what we really want to see. But if you kind of zoom in here to the actual contours on the road area, you can see that here's a low point must be in here. That contour there is a closed contour. It looks like the low point would be somewhere around in there. Station, if we hover long enough, it will tell us that it is station number 862, 88. We can come over here, find our 850, 862, somewhere around in there. Hey, look, there's our low point on our vertical curve on our profile. Low point station 861.26. So we're real close to just picking that up real quick. This is a good way to double check, make sure that your contours are coming in for your corridor properly. You can go back and reference your profile. Now, this surface is very messy. all these extra contours in here, what we can do is again select on the corridor itself, right click, go to corridor properties, and there's a tab here called boundaries. If you go to that boundary tab, this is one window that's really important, and it really is poorly documented. It doesn't look like there's any way to add a boundary at all. What you have to do is right click on the surface, and then you have the options. I don't know why they didn't add buttons to the screen for these options. It just doesn't, it's not consistent. I like to use the add automatically. That works really well. And then I select the daylight. So that line that runs where the contours are tying in will now become an outer boundary. So corridor boundary 1, outside boundary, I hit OK. It's going to ask you, do you want to rebuild? Yes, I do. And what you'll notice is it put a boundary in and all those extraneous contours have been cut out. We do no longer have to worry about tying them off to the existing. We can come down here and we can say, oh, yep, that contour right there comes right back and ties right into that elevation. So it's really, so that's the 1275. So the 1275 comes off, creates our level area in this case for our sidewalk, and then it goes 2% down to the back of the curb, then to the face of the curb, and then whatever the slope of the road is at that point comes back up. It shows our crown of the road. This is 3% going perpendicular across here. And then it does the same thing on the other side and ties back off to that contour. So it's pretty slick when it works. You can run into issues where it can really get laggy. I'm surprised this didn't take longer. This is this is a really long corridor for most of our projects. Um, so it looks like it worked pretty well. And now you can kind of see where your low points are. You can start figuring out where inlets may need to be. Okay, so John asked, what happens if the contours are still really jaggedy? That would go back to your frequency. Okay, so let's select the corridor, right click, and we'll do our corridor properties. Go back to our parameters. So let's mix this up a little bit. Let's make it jagged. Okay, so right now we got 10. So let's make that 50, and we'll make our curve 25. And you will see what happens to your contours when if that frequency is set too large. Put up my surfaces, Main Street. You can see over here, there's the surface that we named it. There's really no definitions added because it's connected to the corridor. I believe it's rebuilt automatically. So even in this case, you can see there's a couple extra lines. This part here isn't as straight on the crown. But what I've noticed in the past, if you don't have your frequency as a small number, you'll notice that on this one's not really good because that's a really large curve. You'll notice that your contour lines do not follow the curbing as well, and you'll see that it's, you know, you can definitely see the vertices in the contours. In this case, most of these look really good, but every time that it says a point, you have less information, so it's going to be a little bit more jagged. It's not going to be as defined. Even out here, you can start seeing how the tie-off points might be off a little bit just because it's not sampling as often. Where you really would notice it is if you have a corridor at an intersection and the curb radius is maybe 20 foot and your sampling is 25, you really will start to notice that your contours do not follow the curb as well. Okay, Joel, yeah, that's something. The basic sidewalk does not have a slope associated with it in the subassembly. I'm not quite sure why. I typically don't use the basic sidewalk because of that. Let me change this back real quick and I'll go back up there. Okay, John Ilko said that the urban sidewalk option does have the slope. So you just kind of that there's just so many different sub-assemblies that sometimes it's hard to figure out what exactly is the right one to really look at. Okay, I'm gonna set those back. Now your surface might be a little bit smoother because now every single time that one of those blue lines crosses the contour, it's sampling it. So you have a lot more sample points. It's not interpolating nearly as much on these curves. Okay, let me go back up to the assemblies. If you do want to change a sub-assembly out, it can get kind of iffy, but there's a lot of tools. I don't use this nearly as much as what I for some of these projects, but you can definitely go in here. You can go in here. There's lots of different options. Let's say, okay, I just want to get rid of that sidewalk. I can hit my delete key on my keyboard and it's gone. But now, if I want to put let me see, urban sidewalk. Let's see, John, do you know where that was located? On what tab? Don't know. Okay. So there's, like I said, there's tons of different options here under curbs. Sure, urban sidewalk. Click on that. Again, go way in here. So now this kind of has to get moved out. Um, so you can either add it again or you can, I don't know if you can just grip it and move it. Looks like you can. Okay. So now we have the new um, sidewalk. So urban sidewalk, yes, it has the 5%. We can change that to be 2% crossover. So that's the better use of the sidewalk on that one. So now if we do that, we should see in our tool space that corridor is out of date, the Main Street corridor. So I'm going to, okay, so we just changed that on the right-hand side. I'm going to go in here. Notice how the contours are currently going straight across the sidewalk area. So I'm going to rebuild. And this contour here should change. And there you go. So now it's 2%. I'm not sure that's going in the right direction. I'm not sure why that one's going in that direction. But so now you can see that changed on the one side and not the other. So you can really get in here and you could create quite a few different assemblies that reflect what design option that you're doing. So that's why you have these other ones down here in our template. Here's just basic lane. That's if you just need to, that could be used at a four-way intersection because you don't have a curb right up against it. Here's just curb and everything on sidewalk on one side. Uh, here's where you have a parallel parking stall on the left side. Here's one where you have a parallel parking stall on the right side. So if you had those, you could put those and assign those to specific regions, and the corridor would bump out and modify for those areas. Now, Evan has also intersection assemblies down here. He will have to do a good topic or covered training on those. I have not been able to use those quite yet, but you can see that most of the time, if it's like a T or something like that, you would not need the curve on one side. So you would actually stop and create a region and implement that um, sub-assembly in that area. If you don't want to see all these lines, once you're happy with them, you can just go ahead and freeze the layer. That was the PR corridor layer. If you have multiple corridors, you might want to start adding a suffix onto them with each street. So this would be the main street corridor. We got some weirdness going on here. Oh, that's because we put the different sidewalk in. But if I went back over to here and changed, let's be really radical on this. Let's change the properties to be, oh, we can't on this side, I'm sorry. On this urban sidewalk subassembly, we can change it from, let's say we make it 10%. Don't do that. It's not going to work. Oh, I see what happened. Moving that did not actually move it properly. I think that's why we were getting some weird contours. So I'm going to delete that back out, and we can add that back in pretty quickly. Make the couple adjustments to the slopes. And again, the 2-to-1, 4-to-1 could be perfectly fine for the situation that you're working in. 0, 0. All right. Okay, get our tool space. Our main street is out of date. It needs rebuilt. Zoom in and see how that affects these contours. Now in this example, we're just demonstrating how the assemblies change. Woo, that made a big difference. That didn't look right at all. Let's see. So you do have to be careful with how you change things. I'm not quite sure what exactly what change we made to really make it go off, but so you got to be careful. If you want, you could. We have our profiles also linked. Let's say we need this to be slightly different. Let's make this go way up high. Our corridor is out of date. Let's rebuild. Hopefully it doesn't have the same settings that we just messed up before. Should be in this area here. Or, I'm sorry, probably this area. So it is acting strange on us now. Turn on our PR corridor. I think it lost its boundary definition. Okay, so now you can see we got really strange contours going on, but our contours inside our bat have been restored. So now we just have to go back in there and do that again. If you only want the corridor surface information, you can click on the corridor surface. It's the same tabs as what's in the corridor properties. So I don't know why they separated it out like that, but it is. So we're going to do this. Here's where this is where it gets really strange, because right now there's no daylight shown as an option. Let's do that one. All right. So now we're back. We have our contours back in here. We can see what's going on. We got something strange going. Oh, that's because we made that at 10%. So it's like these contours are way too close together, but that's because we changed the sidewalk to be 10% just to see what it would do. All right, any other questions before we end today's session? There is a lot of settings, and I don't expect everybody to know what they all do. I don't know what they all do. And they can be a little finicky, but I think once you start using them a little bit more, a lot of our projects are very similar to what this is, just a linear single road. If you start having multiple roads, you learn how to change the way the regions. Let's do that real quick. Give an example of this. Okay, first off, we should probably turn this back to, let's see, down to 2. Okay. I would recommend on larger corridors like this, do not rebuild automatically. You will be sitting around a lot waiting for your corridors to rebuild. It's similar to properties, or to surfaces, but you just got to keep in your head that you did make a change and it will affect your entire design. Okay. I don't know that really did anything. Okay. So let's say we have a section of our corridor, let's say 900 to 1000. We can go in here, corridor properties. We're going to add a pull-off area. So we can go right there, add a region. Let's say pull off left. We select our, let me see, mailbox left. That's 26. We have a, doesn't look like we have a 24-foot mailbox pull off. So this should be interesting how this works. We'll do that one. You'll notice that the pull off is a separate section. It put it at the end. So we actually need to add another region. And you could even put these as station names. So let's say 10 or 1000 to end. Now we go back to sidewalk on both. You'll see now we got that. Now we can change that to there. This is now, oops, say at 900. Then this goes to 900 and goes to 1000. And this goes 1000. I don't know how this is going to look. It might look a little off since it's 26 feet wide for that assembly. Okay, so yes, the transition, as you can see, is not quite right. We have other techniques that we can do to make the transition much better. You can see it bumped it out a little bit, 1 foot on each side, and then put the parking on the side. But it did put that all in. It graded it off until, so no, actually it lost its, so it looks like it lost its daylight. Oh, this does happen quite a bit. You need to go back in to your corridor properties, and sometimes when you add a region, you need to go to your, let me see, where your target. So if you do target for all of them, should be the existing surface. Oops. Select set all. Rebuild again. Well, I keep messing it up the more things I change. But that definitely went the wrong way. So again, I think it's the boundary part that's really causing the issue. So it can be trial and error quite a bit, but let me see. We can even refresh that. Let's see what's underneath here. Just the top, boundaries. Let's remove that boundary, apply, and then add automatically corridor extensions boundary. Oh, you know what it is? I didn't look. The subassembly may not have a tie off on the one side. Oh, no, this one. Did I check this one? And this is why we need good names. All right, before I screw this up anymore, is there any other questions? We're getting close to an hour, so again, if you really need to, in this case, I would say, hey, it's almost as simple to redo the corridor than it is to actually try to figure out what little setting is missing. So I mean, you can grab that cord, but this is where you have to also be careful with corridors. If you accidentally grab one of these blue lines and hit delete, it is gone. None of your information is gone, but the corridor is. And then you can just as quickly bring it back with all the information that you already had. So it wouldn't have any of the regions. You're starting fresh. So if you have a lot of customization, you're going to have to go learn how each one of those settings affects the corridor. If you're pretty simple, straightforward alignment, then redoing the alignment might be or redoing the corridor from scratch might be the quickest way. But I know whenever you start adding intersections and things like that, it can get quite complicated. You create a lot of regions, a lot of specific or detailed um, assemblies need to be created so that everything is properly um, graded out. With that, I'm going to end the training for today. I know we got some weird stuff there at the end, and that's one of the things you got to keep in mind with corridors and assemblies, um, that they don't always act exactly the way that you hope they act. But when they do, it's so much quicker than going through and hand grading and getting things organized. You can go through so many more conceptual layouts, changes, things like that, much quicker than by hand grading anything. All right. I hope everybody learned something. If you have any questions, please ask us. Evan or I, if we have any, specific questions on corridors. I forget what next month's training will be on, but Evan will probably have a great program. All right. Thank you very much.